Shabbat Shalom. This is Ya'ak Hazaki Yahoo, and I start this broadcast as I would start any broadcast by first of all giving all praise, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah Bahashim, Yahushua Hamashiach, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say Shalom Wabarukim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day that the Most High brings us back together, and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High Power, under one covenant. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
I'm joined this afternoon by my most esteemed Aga Kenanaya. Shabbat Shalom, Aki.
Hey, Shabbat Shalom, Akik. Shabbat Shalom, Yasharal. All praises to the Most High for allowing us yet another set apart yom.
Hallelujah. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. It is indeed the Sabbath day in the midst of the feast of Sukkot, the recognition of the feast of Sukkot, the time where Israel dwell in tents or in booths or in Sukkots, in actual tents, tabernacles. So praises to the Father for that event as we continue to uh, enjoy the festivities of Sukkot. Uh, we have a review for you today, and this is how our people, the so-called black people, were brutally robbed of their land and wealth. And this is brought to us by our good friends over at Black Journals. And they do an outstanding job at putting together information, and we do a decent job of reviewing it. So here
Man,
we go.
all praise to the Most High.
Hallelujah, indeed, indeed. Here we go. We're gonna get right to the point. At the beginning of the 20th century, African Americans owned at least 14 million acres of land. By the 21st century, 90% of the land had been stolen from them. Now, African Americans only own 1.1 million acres of farmland and are part owners of another 1.07 million acres. Across a century, white farmers and landowners developed multiple ways to take African Americans' land, using methods such as violence, heirs property, tax sales, and Torrens Acts. Of all these, the Heirs Property Act is still in force today, as black owners lose every source of wealth they've created for generations. To understand the magnitude of this land theft, we must examine the extreme measures taken by those who captured the land from African American landowners. Both laws and practices allowed white landowners, farmers, and developers to manipulate the system so they could gain control over the land owned by African American farmers and homeowners. In this video, we're going to take a look at the 4 ways Black Americans were robbed of their land and how these robberies still occurs today. Before we get right into the video, please smash the like button and subscribe to the channel to keep informed of our eye-opening Black narrative. Untold numbers of Black Americans became landowners following the Civil War, when the government handed over some 20 million acres, mostly in the South, under the Homestead Act. These property holdings could have provided a foundation for black wealth building in post-Jim Crow America. Instead, they became a source of riches for others. Rather than helping to close the racial wealth gap, blacks' land holdings became a key force in widening it as white people and officials used 4 extreme measures to steal and claim black land. Number 1, violence. With black people getting richer and owning more property than ever before, jealous white folks sought to using violence and deadly force to enforce the idea of white supremacy. The Tuskegee Institute and the National ASSN for the Advancement of Colored People have documented more than 3,000 lynchings between 1865 and 1965. Many of those lynched were landowners, and the goal behind them was to bring an end to black wealth, take black land, and uphold white supremacy. These lynchings were not only done by ordinary white people, but some white officials condoned the violence. Several of them added threats of their own. James K. Vardaman, who was governor of Mississippi from 1904 to 1908, was quoted saying, "If it is necessary, every Negro in the state will be lynched." With the start of these lynchings, mostly single families were targeted. However, in some cases, entire black communities were destroyed. The racial cleansing of Forsyth County, Georgia in 1912 and the destruction of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 are some of the most significant examples. Today, Birmingham, Kentucky lies under a floodway created in the 1940s. This town was destroyed by the creation of Kentucky Lake. But at the start of the 20th century, It was a tobacco center with a predominantly black population and a battleground in a 5-year siege by white marauders called Night Riders. On the night of March 8, 1908, about 100 armed whites tore through town on horseback, shooting 7 blacks, 3 of them fatally. The press documented the cases of 14 black landowners who were driven from Birmingham. Together, they lost more than 60 acres of farmland and 21 city lots to whites, many at sheriff's sales, all for low prices. John Scruggs and his granddaughter were killed in Birmingham that night. Property records show that the lot Scruggs had bought for $25 in 1902 was sold for non-payment of taxes 6 years after the attack. A white man bought it for $7.25, about $144 in today's dollars. Land that had belonged to other blacks went for even less. John Puckett's 2 acres sold for $4.70, while Ben Kelly's city lot went for $2.60. In Pierce City, Missouri, 1,000 armed whites burned down 5 black-owned houses and killed 4 blacks on August 18, 1901. Within days, all of the town's 129 blacks had fled, never to return. According to the Associated Press, 9 Pierce City blacks would lose a total of 30 acres of farmland and 10 city lots. Whites would go on to buy it all at bargain prices. In the case of Eveline Brinson, whose house was burned down by the mob, she would sell her lot for $25 to a white woman after the attack. The attacks on Birmingham and Pierce City were part of a pattern in southern and border states in the first half of the 20th century. Lynchings and mob attacks on blacks, followed by an exodus of black citizens, some of them forced to abandon their property or sell it at cut-rate prices. Black landowners were put under a tremendous amount of pressure, from authorities and otherwise, to give up their land and leave. They became refugees in their own country. For example, the Associated Press found that 18 black families lost a total of 330 acres, plus 48 city lots when they fled Ocoee, Florida, after a 1920 Election Day attack on the black community. According to property records, some were able to sell their land at a fair price, but others, such as Valentine Hightower, were not. He parted with 52 acres for $10 in 1926. Today, the land lost by the 18 Ocoee families, not including buildings now on it, is assessed at more than $4.2 million.
Whew, man. Yeah, so that's a lot to digest, and a lot of robbery and a lot of just unreasonable stealing and murder and just craziness. I mean, you know, wow. So I don't even know where to begin. I mean, we're only 5 minutes into this thing, and it's already heartbreaking.
Indeed. Crafty counsel has been taken against Yah's people, and you know we'll continue to hear how they were able to do it. But you know it's no coincidence that all of this is a byproduct of, well, not a byproduct of the curses, and it's also it's why our communities are so lacking now. Because we're dependent upon our oppressors. But that wasn't always the case. But we'll get into that when we get ready to close out.
Yeah. The more we try to advance, the more they try to keep us from advancing, and it really got us to a place. You think about those situations at that time, having that land and owning that land, and before it was robbed, the situation, the circumstance that put our people in at that time compared to now, where we have such little ownership of land and ownership of anything. And man, they plan work seemed like it worked to a T. It really seemed like it worked to a T in destroying our our people. And I know the Abbas, allowed that to be, but I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that was his. I think he knew that that's what would happen, but I don't think that was his doing. Like I'm gonna make them do this, and maybe it was, but maybe he just knew what it was in their hearts. And if he knew if he didn't allow us, or if he didn't cause us to defeat them, then this was what would happen in those situations. So, wow, that is a lot to digest. So, let's continue.
Sometimes individual black farmers were singled out and attacked by bands of white farmers known as the Whitecaps. Operating in several southern and border states around the turn of the 20th century, they were intent on driving blacks from their land and discouraging other blacks from acquiring it. Whitecaps often nailed notes with crudely drawn coffins to the doors of black landowners, warning them to leave or die. The warning to Eli Hilson of Lincoln County, Mississippi, came on November 18, 1903, when Whitecaps shot up his house. However, Hilson ignored the warning. A month later, the 39-year-old farmer was shot dead as he drove his buggy toward his farm. The horse pulling the buggy trotted home, delivering Hilson's body to his wife, Hannah. She struggled to rear their 11 children and worked the 74-acre farm, but she could not manage without her husband. She lost the property through a mortgage foreclosure in 1905. Land records show the farm went for over $400 to S.P. Oliver, a county supervisor. Today, the property is assessed at over $60,000. It wasn't just whitecaps and night riders who chased blacks from their land. Sometimes officials did it. In Yazoo County, Mississippi, Norman Stevens and his twin brother Homer ran a trucking business, hauling cotton pickers to plantations. Stevens' widow, Rosie Fields, would reveal the harrowing story that unfolded years later. One day in 1950, a white farmer demanded that Stevens immediately deliver workers to his field. Stevens explained he had other commitments and promised to drop off the men later. However, the farmer fetched the sheriff. That evening, the brothers found themselves locked in a second-floor room at the county jail. They squeezed through a window, leaped to the ground, and ran. Fields said her husband later told her why. They had overheard the sheriff, now dead, talking about where to hide their bodies. Fields said Stevens and his brother quickly flagged down a bus to Ohio. A year later, she and her 5 children joined them. For a decade, the family made mortgage and property tax payments on the house they left behind, records show. But it was hard to keep up, and they never dared to return, Fields said. Finally, in the 1960s, they stopped paying and lost the house they had purchased for $700 in 1942. One of the most brutal cases of racial violence to claim black land was the story of Anthony Crawford. Crawford was a rich black American who inherited farmable land on his father's death, which he increased by substantial land purchases in 1883, 1888, 1899, and 1903. In the mid or late 1890s, Crawford was co-founder of the Industrial Union of Abbeville County, which was devoted to the material, moral, and intellectual advance of the colored people. He was also the father of 12 sons and 4 daughters. Crawford was without doubt one of the richest men in Abbeville County. However, his prosperity had made him a target. The success of blacks such as Crawford threatened the reign of white supremacy, as at that time there were obvious limitations or ceilings that blacks weren't supposed to go beyond. For many decades, successful blacks lived with a gnawing fear that white neighbors could at any time do something violent and take everything from them. That day would come for Crawford, leading to this untimely demise. On October 21, 1916, Crawford was taking 2 loads of cotton and a load of seed into Abbeville and had a disagreement over the price of cottonseed with W.D. Barksdale, a white store owner. Barksdale offered Crawford 85 cents a pound for his cottonseed. Crawford replied that he had a better offer. Barksdale called him a liar. Crawford called the storekeeper a cheat. 3 clerks grabbed axe handles and Crawford backed into the street, where Sheriff Burtz appeared and arrested Crawford for cursing a white man. Crawford was held at the jail briefly and released later that day on $15 bail. While Crawford was arranging bail, Barksdale was organizing a mob with McKinney Can to whip Crawford and cure him if possible. Sheriff Burtz allowed Crawford to exit from a side door, but the mob saw him anyway and pursued him into a cotton mill nearby, where Crawford took shelter in the boiler room. McKinney Can entered the boiler room after Crawford, and Crawford, grabbing a hammer from some nearby tools, knocked the man unconscious. Although the mill workers attempted to stop it, Crawford was stabbed and severely beaten by the mob. Sheriff Burtz appeared and arrested Crawford once more, much to the chagrin of the mob of whites. The sheriff could only get Crawford away from the mob by promising to the brothers of Can that he would not try to sneak Crawford out of town before the full extent of McKinney Can's injuries was known. As it happened, Ken was not badly hurt, although Crawford was. He was treated by physician C.C. Gamble, who also happened to be the mayor of Abbeville. Gamble announced that Crawford would likely die from his wounds. Considering that Crawford might die before the mob could get to him, and concerned that the sheriff might spirit him out of town at 3 p.m., around 200 white men besieged the jail, captured and disarmed Sheriff Burtz, and abducted Crawford. Crawford was dragged down 3 flights of stairs amongst a cheering, bloodthirsty mob, where they proceeded to beat him with rocks, wagon boards, jump and spit on him. The mob then dragged him through the black section of town with a rope around his neck as a warning. They then stole a lumber wagon from a black driver and used it to take Crawford to a fairground nearby. Crawford, likely dead by that point, was still hung from a tree, and armed whites riddled his body with bullets, rendering it to a bloody pulp by the bloodthirsty white mob that resented his wealth. The paper's headline the next day read, "Negro strung up and shot to pieces." To hide the truth, the county coroner reported that Crawford had died at the hands of parties unknown. That night, the relentless mob decided they needed to drive Crawford's children and their families from the area. On October 23, 1916, the white citizens of Abbeville, including many members of the lynch mob, voted to expel the remainder of Crawford's family from South Carolina and to seize their considerable property holdings. They also voted to close down all the black-owned businesses in Abbeville. The Crawfords requested they be given until the November 15th, and it was granted they were to leave by mid-November. They did indeed leave, leaving behind their family's generational assets. Number 2, tax sale. The next method used to scheme black people out of their land was tax sales. Tax sales were a way that the land could be taken from its owners and auctioned off. White tax assessors routinely overvalued black-owned land, forcing black property owners to bear a heavier tax burden than whites and slowly draining families of earnings. If black-owned property became valuable or a black property owner challenged white supremacy, local officials could simply declare the property tax delinquent and sell it at a tax sale. In these cases, black people would want to stay on their land instead of selling it, but most of them lived on a fixed income. Consequently, many of these homeowners eventually found themselves unable to afford their annual property taxes. Once they were in default, the county would put the property up for auction. This was something that developers used as an advantage when they wanted to access land families didn't want to sell. The story of Evelina Jenkins, a black South Carolina Sea Islands native, offers a case in point. She owned dozens of acres of property, including an entire island, at a time in the early 1970s when land values along the state's coastline were skyrocketing. As a result of the state's pitiful expenditures on colored schools, Miss Jenkins had received only minimal education and never learned to read. Decades of disfranchisement and white control of local government and the courts had taught her that whatever rights and protections it afforded did not apply to her. Even venturing inside the local government offices where people registered for licenses or paid their taxes was an invitation to be mistreated and humiliated, and was something to avoid. So Miss Jenkins entrusted a white neighbor who had befriended her to take her annual property tax payments to town for her. But rather than submitting Miss Jenkins's payments, he pocketed them, then waited for her taxes to fall delinquent, whereupon he bought the lien to her property at the county's annual tax auction. Then, after the statutory redemption window closed, he gained title to her land holdings, island and all, which he subsequently resold to a developer. In the decades since, the land Jenkins once owned has generated untold amounts of wealth. Houses on the island she once owned today sell for upward of $400,000. Miss Jenkins, though, never saw a dime of it. Rather than leave her children an ample inheritance, she died penniless, forced to live out her last days in her daughter's mobile home. While Miss Jenkins's case was particularly egregious, the legal theft of black land in similar ways was not uncommon. In booming real estate markets like Hilton Head and surrounding Sea Islands, tax sales afforded investors a lucrative opportunity to acquire valuable property for pennies on the dollar. Number 3, Torrens Axe. A third method was called the Torrens Axe. The Torrens Axe was based off of the Torrens systems, which was first used 1858 in Australia. It was developed by Sir Robert Torrens for the purpose of enhancing the certainty of title to land and to simplify dealings involving land. When introduced in the United States, the Torrens Act was supposed to be used to simplify title registry. Instead, it became a loophole that allowed third parties to forcibly remove families from their property through partition sales. Partition sales take place when one of a property's owners wants to sell, but the others don't. The Torrens Act and related rules allowed sales to take place without the notification of family members or other co-owners of the land. Once the sale was made, the rules associated with the Torrens Act protected the buyer from any legal recourse by the owners who did not know about or agree to the sale. Number 4, heirs property. While there were several ways people were allowed to take land differed by state, with each having its own approach to scheme black people out of their land, heirs property was a method used across all of them. Heirs property generally refers to family-owned property inherited by multiple generations without the formal legal proceedings necessary to prove ownership. Without probate proceedings at an owner's death, heirs may possess the property, but they lack the clear title necessary to prove their ownership status. This means they may not be able to sell the property, use the property as collateral for financing, or receive USDA benefits for farming activities conducted on the property. It also means they may be at a greater risk of losing the property through a partition action or because they fail to pay their property taxes. Over generations, the number of owners would become substantial. This created challenges for the landowners. It eventually became easy enough for other people to come in and take control of the land, especially when every family member could not be found to seek permission for selling the land. So even if some members of the family wanted to keep the land, other members could choose to sell it. White developers would end up preying on family miscommunication and taking control of the land. These partition sales invariably resulted in the land being sold at well below its market value, enriching the buyer while leaving the displaced and dispossessed family members with nothing. Speculators have used this legal trick to force the sale of millions of acres of black-owned land over the past several decades. Only in the past couple of years have some states begun to adopt a uniform law designed to curb the most predatory abuses of heirs property laws. However, much of the damage has been done. The cumulative effect of these methods used over a century to steal land or otherwise manipulate families out of their land was devastating. In Mississippi alone, the land stolen from 1950 to 1964 totaled up to 800,000 acres. A research team calculated the value of the stolen land in Mississippi to be $3.7 billion to $6.6 billion in today's dollars. And these estimates of white wealth extraction from African Americans through land theft are just one state. Today in the U.S., 43.4% of Black Americans are homeowners, compared with 72.1% of white people, 51.1% of the Latina population, and 53% of AAPI, indigenous or other. Home ownership is the biggest contributor to wealth and wealth transfer between generations. History shows us that Black home ownership has been stifled at every turn. Black land theft allows people to see that African Americans falling behind financially is not because they don't try, but because every time they had a chance to get ahead, laws, rules, regulations, and those with power used the system to bend the rules to take from them. When it comes to Black land theft, it wasn't just government institutions. It was white people who had the money and knew the laws they could use to swindle African American landowners. The rules and laws in place allowed white people to use government rules and institutions to not only steal land, but enrich themselves once they got a hold of it. And because this massive theft was accomplished through thousands of small transactions over decades, it was easy for the rest of us to look the other way. Black land theft today isn't as prevalent and blatant, and new wealth extraction schemes have gained prominence. But what the story of Black land theft in the 20th century tells us is that if no one is asking questions about what thousands of small financial transactions add up to in a nation that was founded on slavery, then we are positioning ourselves, by design or not, to miss the next wealth extraction schemes for decades as well. In a country where the typical white family still has 8 times the wealth of the typical Black family, and the racial wealth divide is getting worse, we can't afford not to ask these questions. Black land theft happened from the 20th century to the 21st century, and it had major impacts on the lives of African American landowners and their descendants. We don't know what life would be like if all that land hadn't been stolen, but African Americans' financial futures might have looked very different. As always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe.
So man. Uh,
It's
so
very
yeah,
upsetting.
yeah. Just so much to process, so much to man to hear. And this is my first time seeing this video, and it's a lot. It's a whole lot. So um, sadly, it's not surprising. I knew that there was a lot of folly and evil things that had gone on that had contributed to our demise and whatnot. And all of these things, all of these things are uh, a direct result of our disobedience to the Father. And there's just no way around that. So, uh, wow, yeah, it's just I don't even know what uh, it's just heartbreaking, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's so hard for me to even say anything because it's literally heartbreaking to think that this was the situation that our people have gone through for taking taking away your our ability to be people, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and that they would go to such extremes, such extents to do so. Allah blatantly forbid us in the Torah to do any of these things, to oppress people in that manner, to steal their stuff, to none of these things would be acceptable in his sight. If the only way you could take somebody's stuff like that is if you went to war with them and you won the war. Then again, that stuff is now yours because you killed them. That it's over with. But outside of that, I mean, to act like one thing and to act like I'm gonna pay your taxes for you, pocket your money, and then I'm gonna go after your land. Like
Mm-hmm.
what kind of a creature, what kind of an animal you gotta be to do something like that. I mean, I'm trusting you to follow through on this particular situation, and your response is, "I got him right where I want him." I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's crazy. So, uh, that's all I got. I can go ahead.
Hey, Khan, unfortunately, these practices still go on today. Uh, like he said at the beginning, uh, we still have a small amount of land now, collectively as a people, but nowhere near what it once was. And they still employ these tactics. Not so much of the violence, but the tax and how they go about gaining the land now. Uh, like I was telling you earlier, I grew up not too far from that Birmingham, Kentucky, and had never heard anything about it.
Mhm.
Uh, it's actually that area uh, at one time had the largest Confederate monument in the state.
Wow.
Uh, They took it down in 2020 when there was social upheaval. What do you call it? Social uprisings going on throughout the country.
Hmm.
They took it down. Uh, the county that is in, Marshall County, Kentucky. Uh, their high school at one point, their mascot was a rebel, and these people are well aware of their ancestors' deeds, and in fact, not only did they have a Confederate flag at this largest monument that's in the state, they had a Confederate flag standing at the courthouse, and they asked one of the somebody with the city council, why is this up? And his response was, we wanted to show a pride in our ancestors. Uh, Kentucky was a neutral state. Uh, during the Civil War, but many of the soldiers, many of the men from Kentucky went and fought on the side of the Confederates, and especially down in the western part of the state. The high school I graduated from was actually named after one of these Confederate generals, General Lloyd Tillman. So another point I wanted to make is we know that this is injustice, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but in South Africa right now,
Mhm.
uh, the people are uprising against the Boers who own the majority of the land. They're a minority there. The
Mhm.
Boers came from Amsterdam. These are Europeans,
Right.
uh, and they own the majority of the land there. So you have several political movements going on right now to change that. And what the Boers are doing, they are, because evidently a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, there was a song that came out that was being chanted, and it's "Kill the Boers, kill the farmers,
Mhm.
gain back our land."
Right.
Uh, so what the Boers and the farmers are doing, they are planning to take this to the United Nations
Mhm.
for injustice, which is crazy to me.
Right.
It's crazy
We
that they
stole
would.
the land, and now they want it back, and we won't.
Right. So, if they're able to do that, why haven't we tried to do that? Or why hasn't there been a call for uh because the same, worse has happened to us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh why hasn't this been brought to the United Nations with this injustice that has gone on? And lastly, you know, this us being here wasn't because our ancestors were doing good. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't because they were being pleasing in the sight of the Father.
Right.
Uh, you know, and for us to kind of come up and do as well as we were doing at one point, despite the situation, might have neglected why we were actually here. Um, I know that you had spoke about how you were able to kind of piece the story together on during Black History Month. You would see our people in chains and see the brutality of our people, and able to register that with the curses.
Right.
Perhaps if we were all doing well, you know, we wouldn't have woke up to who
Right.
we truly are and
That's
why we're here. Um, and Shaul, he's speaking to the Romans, and he tells them, don't boast yourself up against the natural born branches, because the Father is going to do something with them. What will he do to you who are not of this branch that were grafted in?
right.
So I was reading in Joshua this morning as well, and Joshua chapter 11. There was a great host that came against Yasharal of all these Canaanite nations, and in one of the verses, like I meant to send it to you, but it
Mm-hmm.
says that the Father put that in those nations' heart so
Mm-hmm.
that He could destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
So they were able to do all these things to our ancestors for a purpose, and we have to remember that. And I get mad as Sheol about different things that we cover and different things that we see,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but I've got to remain patient because that recompense is gonna be for real. It's gonna be serious.
Indeed. Indeed. Yes, indeed, Akeem. And man, kind, and this is for the purpose of the apple. It you can never question him and all that he's done, and because he's has way more understanding and is way wiser than we could ever hope to be.
Mm-hmm.
But man, it's unreal. It's really unreal to see some of these things and to understand that this is what has transpired in our people over these years, and it's so hard to understand, to not to understand, but to even think about, to fathom. And man, yeah, so sad situation, very sad existence, especially when you look at this, at the plight of our people right here today. They stole our land. They put us in projects and did everything they could to, keep us down. And over there, they're, you know, trying to get. They came over there stealing land, and they won't help, getting it restored, so that our people don't get back. So they tried everything in every turn and every facet to, try to hold our people down in every possible way, and they're trying everything they can to do so. So it's unreal. It's really unreal. Like there's literally no compassion, no, man, I got to do better, or I can't. This can't be. This is just bad. I can't do that. Like there's no inkling of, you know, I'll die. There's a penalty for this, and it's gonna be bad. You know what I'm
Kind.
saying?
You
Like,
know, we were told in Torah that no man was supposed to stay up hung from a tree uh, to the evening.
right,
Uh, they would leave our ancestors hanging for days to
right,
install fear.
right,
Uh, so you are totally misunderstood or totally confused if you think that there's not going to be recompense for that.
right, exactly. Because it's completely against Torah, and Torah is going to be the law, period, period. So, and you're gonna be subject to it. There's no way around it.
Kind
You're
of,
gonna be subject to it. So,
yeah. I want to say the book of Second Address talks about uh, some of the nations being brought to I forget exactly where they're being brought to, but they're being brought in chains. And
mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow,
Yes,
like why? I'm thinking in my mind, this is when I was young in my walk, like why, and we see why. We see why that some of these people will be brought in chains.
and change. Yes, indeed. That judgment. They're gonna get that judgment. And the Abba is not. It's not lax in his judgment. He's not. It's not an easy. Well, pay a little fine and that's it. He don't want your money. He wants your blood.
That's right.
And yeah, when you do evil like this manner of evil, yeah, it's a recompense that's correct. That's attached to that. So,
Mhm.
man, oh man, yeah. I'm gonna leave it there. You got anything else on?
Nah, all praises to the Most High for removing the sleep from our eyes,
Mm-hmm.
and causing us to understand.
Indeed, Aki. Indeed, man. And it used to be for Black History Month. We see these historical situations, and a lot of our people have gotten to where they detest or despise slave movies or things about slavery, like that they somehow have risen up again above it. No, you need to understand these things. You need to understand that your people didn't migrate here. You need to understand that this happened to your people. This is where your stock is from, and there's a reason for it. We didn't get this in the movies, but there's a reason for it, and you can find that reason written in Torah, Deuteronomy 28. You can go right on this channel and find us going through Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 30, and putting those things into proper perspective for our people. So
God.
I
And
pray our people. Go ahead.
Salaki, I apologize
You
about,
know, go ahead.
feel like I'm cutting you off, but
You good, bro.
they don't want these things taught in school because it's a testament against them. They have every excuse in the world of why our communities are the way that they are, and it's none of it is truthful. These stories are not being told, and they don't want the next generation to know these things.
Right.
And sadly, like you said, a lot of our people want to ignore what is happening because they've overcome in some sense, in a vain way. I'll say that in a
Right.
vain way, they feel like their money has prospered them and caused them to be above this, but that's not the case, man. That's not the case.
Not at all. Not at all. He that is ignorant of his history is bound to repeat it. So
Hmm.
uh, I don't know who said that, but it's absolutely true. And with that, we're going to conclude this particular video, and we're going to conclude with the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter number 12 and verse number 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is imperative that we understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep his commandments. Why? Because this is the reason that we are here. At the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled and all the smoke is cleared, we will be judged on whether we feared the Most High and kept his commandments. Why? Because this is the whole reason that we were made. I am your Akazaki Yahoo, joined by my most esteemed Aka Kenanaya. We give all praise, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah, Bahashem, Yahushua HaMashiach, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say Shalom Wabaruki, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day that the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High Power, under one covenant. Until that day, Shabbat Shalom, family.
Shabbat shalom, Mr. Picard.
All praises.